Today, I'm going to tell you a story so intense it forces you to question everything you think you know about enemies and fate, set against the burning horizon of the Wild West. This is a place where gunfire speaks louder than mercy, and where a single encounter can seal a person's destiny. It all begins with one small choice, made in the middle of chaos, that ignites a conflict far greater than survival. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Arizona Territory, 1887. Zephyra Kane stood on the wooden porch of Blackreach Stand, watching the sun sink low and wash the distant ridgelines in amber and burnished gold. A warm desert breeze teased the hem of her plain cotton dress as she looked out over the land that had been hers for 5 long years. At 22, she had learned to live with the frontier's rough beauty, its dust, its silence, its quiet dangers, though part of her still ached for the ordered world of the East, where her childhood had ended with her mother's death. "I'll be back before 2 weeks pass, Zephyra," her father had said 3 days earlier. Halver Kane had tried to sound certain, but worry had creased his weathered face as he rode out toward Tucson for supplies. "Mind the books, and don't give Jameson another penny. The man owes more than he can ever pay." She smiled faintly at the memory, brushing wind-blown strands of pale hair from her cheek. Since moving west, the trading post had become her entire world, a crossroads where split-mark folk, soldiers from the forts, and the occasional peaceful native trader passed through, each carrying their own hunger, suspicion, and need. Halver had taught her one rule above all others: be firm, but never cruel. That lesson had carried her through countless days, running the post alone. As the last sunlight stretched across the yard, Zephyra quietly listed tomorrow's tasks in her mind. The flour barrels needed refilling. Cloth ordered by cavalry wives from the nearby fort would arrive with her father's return. Small, ordinary concerns, the kind that made frontier life feel manageable. She had just turned toward the door when the air changed. The crickets fell silent. Even the desert wind seemed to pause. A cold prickle crept down her spine, despite the heat that still clung to the evening. Something was wrong. Her gaze swept the perimeter of Blackreach Stand, past the small corral where 2 horses grazed undisturbed, toward the brush where shadows thickened. Halver's warnings echoed in her mind. Civilization was creeping west, but danger still waited in the margins. The attack struck like lightning. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, dark figures poured from the brush. Redveil kin, their faces marked for war, moving with deadly precision. Zephyra froze as arrows tore through the air, slamming into the porch posts beside her. She screamed and staggered backward, slamming the door shut. Through the front window she saw flames leap from the barn roof. Tarl Bunek, the old hired hand, burst from the bunkhouse, only to collapse as an arrow drove into his chest. "God help me," she breathed, dragging her father's shotgun from behind the counter. Her hands shook as she loaded it. She knew the truth. Against so many warriors, survival was unlikely. But Halver had not raised her to surrender. The door shattered inward as 2 attackers forced their way inside. Zephyra fired once. The blast thundered through the room. One warrior fell. The other kept coming. She swung the shotgun like a club, the stock cracking against his skull. The impact bought her seconds, just enough to bolt through the rear door. Outside, chaos ruled. Blackreach Stand burned, smoke boiling into the darkening sky. Zephyra crouched behind a water trough, heart hammering as she searched for escape. If she could reach the horse paddock, she might outrun them. That was when she saw him. He stood amid fire and smoke, taller than the rest, unmoving. A single eagle feather threaded through his dark hair. Symbols of authority marked his bare chest. Even at a distance, His presence bent the air around him. This was no raider. This was a chief. Their eyes met across the yard. Time faltered. The screams and crackle of flames faded as Zephyra found herself locked in his gaze. Dark, sharp, impossibly focused. Intelligence lived there. Command. And something else she could not name. For Rask, the feared leader whose name unsettled entire settlements, the world narrowed to one woman standing in the firelight, defiant and unbroken. Something stirred in him, recognition without reason. His heart thundered as if he had run miles, though he had not moved. A burning beam collapsed nearby, snapping the moment apart. Zephyra turned and ran as the warriors reacted to the noise. She vanished into the deepening desert, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and a small hunting knife hidden in her boot. A gift from her father she had once thought improper to wear. She disappeared into the wasteland knowing she would be hunted. Behind her, Rask watched the darkness swallow her. He lifted his hand to command pursuit, then stopped. His warriors waited. "The woman escapes," one said in confusion. "She will not go far," Rask answered evenly, masking the conflict burning within him. "The desert will return her to us." As the raid continued, Rask stood alone, staring into the black horizon where Zephyra Kane had vanished, already knowing he would lead the hunt himself. The woman had vanished into the dark. In all his 36 summers, Rask had never felt anything like it. An unsettling certainty, as if the Great Spirit itself had reached through an enemy's eyes and laid a hand upon his soul. Night closed in as Zephyra Kane forced her body forward long past the edge of endurance, driven by terror sharpened into resolve. The desert, gentle and wide beneath the sun, had become a maze of threat and silence. Every whisper of brush sent her heart lurching. Was it a rattlesnake, a prowling coyote, or a tracker moving without sound? She clung to Halvar Kane's lessons. Stay to the high ground. Mark the stars. Use dry washes where footprints fade. In the darkness, such knowledge brought little comfort. By midnight, her strength ebbed. Her throat felt scraped raw, her legs trembling with every step. She found brief refuge beneath an overhanging slab of stone and sank down, listening hard for pursuit. In that stillness, reality struck with crushing weight. Blackreach Stand, her home, was ash. Tarl Bunik lay dead. Her father would return to ruin, perhaps believing his daughter lost forever. And she was alone. Alone in one of the harshest lands on earth, hunted by the Red Veil kin. A sob rose in her chest, but she swallowed it down. Tears were a luxury she could not afford. They would steal the moisture her body desperately needed. Instead, her mind betrayed her, conjuring the image of the Apache chief once more, the intensity of his gaze, the strange pause that had saved her life. Why had he hesitated? Why had those eyes awakened something other than fear? "Madness," she murmured to the night. "Only exhaustion." After mere minutes of rest, Zephyra pushed herself onward. She needed water. Without it, the desert would finish what her pursuers had begun. Miles behind her, Rask knelt beside the trail, fingers brushing disturbed sand and bent grass. Few alive could read sign as he could. It was the gift that had shaped him into a hunter without equal, a war chief without rival. "She moves with intent," he murmured in his own tongue. "Not like prey fleeing blind." He had dismissed the others, choosing to track alone. Korak, his second, had questioned him with a look. Chiefs did not usually hunt a single escaped woman. Rask himself could not name the force that drove him. The raid had achieved its purpose. Horses, powder, supplies for those hidden within Ravenspine Hollow. Yet here he was, drawn to one woman's trail, as though it carried something beyond survival. As the night paled toward dawn, Rask stopped beside a rise of stone. The signs spoke clearly. Dragging steps, a palm pressed to rock for balance. She would not last another day without water. With calm certainty, he altered his path. Not toward her tracks, but toward a spring concealed among boulders ahead. Thirst would guide her there as surely as instinct guides a wounded animal. There he would wait, not as captor and captive, but as two lives pulled together by a force neither could yet understand. The sun climbed mercilessly over the Arizona desert. Heat swallowed the air itself. Zephyra had managed only a few hours of movement before collapsing beneath a shallow rock shelf. Her lips split and bleeding, her tongue thick with thirst, her skin burned raw beneath the rising sun. She knew the truth. Without water, the desert granted no mercy. One day, perhaps two, if shade favored her. Yet something within refused to yield. Perhaps it was Halvar's stubborn blood. Perhaps it was the human spirit's quiet rebellion against its own ending. Or perhaps it was the memory she could not silence. Those eyes. With that thought lending her strength, Zephyra rose again. She would move while shadows still existed, before the sun turned the land into a furnace. Then she sensed it. A subtle shift. A faint dampness carried on the air, alien to the parched ground. Her body turned before thought could follow. The spring lay hidden between stone walls, water seeping from rock into a shallow basin before vanishing into the earth. A miracle. Zephyra fell to her knees, forcing restraint. Halvar had warned her never to drink too fast after thirst. Instead, she cupped her hands, taking careful sips, each swallow a gift beyond measure. So focused was she on survival that she did not sense the change behind her. Only when she lifted her head did she see it, the reflection in the water's surface. A tall figure stood silently at her back. Zephyra spun around, stumbling backward as her hand shot toward the knife hidden in her boot. Fatigue betrayed her. The sudden movement sent the world tilting, darkness creeping along the edges of her sight. The last image burned into her fading vision was Rask stepping toward her, not with violence, but with an unexpected softness in his expression. When consciousness returned, Zephyra lay beneath the shelter of a massive boulder. A cool, damp cloth rested against her brow. Night had fallen again. Nearby, a small fire burned low, nearly smokeless. Across the flames sat Rask, his dark eyes reflecting the flicker of firelight as he watched her in silence. "You are stronger than most," he said at last, his English measured but clear. The desert would have taken many before now. Zephyra struggled to push herself upright, confusion warring with exhaustion. Her throat burned despite the water. "Why?" she managed, the single word carrying more meaning than she could voice. Rask seemed to understand. He studied her face for a long moment before answering. "I have fought the white man's armies for 15 summers," he said slowly. "I have seen courage, and I have seen fear, but never have I felt what passed between us when our eyes met." He leaned forward slightly, firelight carving shadows across his features. "The old ones speak of souls that recognize each other, even when born as enemies. I do not yet understand it, but I know it must not be ignored." Zephyra stared at him. This man, who should have embodied every frontier nightmare, spoke words that echoed her own unspoken thoughts. "What happens now?" she asked, forcing steadiness into her voice. Rask rose in one fluid motion, his height imposing even to someone raised among frontier men. "Now you choose," he said. "Return to your people, who will soon search the ashes of Black Reach Stand, or come with me and learn what the Great Spirit has placed between us." He extended his hand across the fire. "I offer no chains, only protection, and a chance to see with new eyes. Under the vast sky, stars burning cold and endless above the desert, Zephyra Kane faced the most consequential choice of her life. Every rational instinct urged her to flee, to return to civilization, to her own kind. Yet when she looked into Rask's eyes, she saw not the savage enemy of frontier stories, but a man of depth and restraint, a man offering not threat, but choice. Her fingers trembled as she reached forward and took his hand. Their journey through the moonlit desert felt unreal. Rask moved with the certainty of one walking familiar ground, while Zephyra struggled to keep pace. Her body, depleted by thirst and exposure, protested every step. When she stumbled for the third time, Rask stopped. Without speaking, he removed a strip of dried meat from a pouch at his waist and handed it to her. "Eat," he said simply. "It will give you strength." She accepted it cautiously. The taste was strange but sustaining, warmth spreading through her hollow stomach. "Where are you taking me?" she asked after a long silence. "To safety," Rask replied, resuming his stride. As they traveled, Zephyra studied him. Companion or captor, she still could not say. Moonlight traced the copper of his skin and glinted off the blade at his belt. Yet it was the quiet authority in his bearing that struck her most. "Why did you come after me yourself?" she asked. "Surely a chief has greater duties." Rask did not slow. "I saw something." "What do you mean?" He stopped then, turning to face her. "When our eyes met across the fire, the Great Spirit spoke. I do not yet know what was said." Before she could answer, Rask stiffened. His hand moved to his knife. In one swift motion, he pulled Zephyra behind a boulder. "Do not move," he whispered, his breath warm near her ear. Moments later, she heard it, the rhythmic thunder of hooves. "Ash Spur Column," Rask murmured. "A patrol." Zephyra's heart raced. Rescue, soldiers, home. Yet she remained silent. Perhaps she remembered his words about cavalry bringing death to his people. Or perhaps it was something deeper she could not yet name. The patrol passed within 50 yards. 6 riders in formation, their silhouettes sharp against the stars. Zephyra held her breath until they vanished over the ridge. Rask looked at her, questioning. He had not restrained her. The choice had been hers. "They would have killed you," she said quietly. Surprise crossed his face, followed by respect. He nodded once, took her hand again, and led her onward. By dawn, they reached a hidden canyon, its entrance so narrow they were forced to walk in single file. Beyond the narrow passage, the canyon opened wide, revealing a clear creek bordered by cottonwood trees, an unlikely sanctuary carved into the desert's harsh spine. Rask guided her beneath a rocky overhang that offered shelter. Exhaustion finally claimed Zephyra, and she sank to the ground without protest. Rask moved with quiet efficiency. He gathered wood and built a small, nearly smokeless fire, then filled a hollowed gourd with water from the creek and handed it to her. "Drink slowly," he said. As the cool water eased her burning throat, Zephyra studied his face in the strengthening light. The feared war chief bore the marks of long struggle, deep lines at the corners of his eyes, and a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. "Your people," she said carefully. "Where are they?" "Safe," Rask replied. His tone closed the subject. After a moment, Zephyra spoke again. "My father will be searching for me." "When Halvar Kane returns and finds Blackreach Stand destroyed," Rask said evenly, "he will believe you dead. Perhaps that is mercy." Anger flared in her chest. Mercy for whom? That my father should grieve for nothing? Rask's expression did not change. What life waits for you if you return? Your home is ash, and a white woman who has been with the Apache. He let the rest remain unspoken. The truth struck her hard. She knew the stories. Women who returned were never truly accepted, always watched, whispered about, judged. "So I am your prisoner," she said bitterly. "No," Rask answered at once. "You are under my protection. There is a difference." "Protection from what?" "From my warriors, who would see you as spoils, from settlers, who would see you as ruined, from soldiers who would use you to find us, and then discard you." His dark eyes held hers. "From a world that has no place for either of us as we truly are." The honesty in his voice silenced her. This man, her supposed enemy, was offering her more dignity than she might ever receive from her own people again. They remained in the canyon as the day passed. Rask left briefly and returned with 2 rabbits, which he cleaned and cooked with practiced skill. The simple meal was the most satisfying Zephyra could remember. Later, she gestured toward his face. "That scar, how did you get it?" Rask's hand rose unconsciously to the mark. "My first fight with the ash spur column. I was 17 summers." "And you've been fighting ever since?" A shadow crossed his features. "The Apache way is being erased. Our lands taken. Our people pushed into barren ground. Our children sent away, where they beat our language from their mouths." His voice stayed steady, but Zephyra felt the anger beneath it. "What would you have me do?" she asked quietly. The question surprised them both. For the first time, Zephyra considered the Apache not as traders passing through her father's post, nor as monsters from FrontierTales, but as people fighting to survive. "I don't know," she admitted. Rask studied her, as if weighing her words. "Few of your people would even ask." As evening settled, Zephyra drifted toward the creek. She knelt beside it, studying her reflection in the still water. 5 days in the desert had changed her. Sunburned skin, tangled hair, torn, dust-stained clothes. Yet something deeper had shifted, a quiet awareness she could not yet name. Soft footsteps announced Rask's presence. He crouched beside her, his reflection joining hers in the water. "The desert reshapes those who live through it," he said. "It strips away what is false." "And what remains?" Zephyra asked, meeting his eyes in the reflection. Rask dipped his hand into the creek, shattering their mirrored images. "Truth. Painful sometimes. Always valuable." They sat in silence as shadows stretched across the canyon. Zephyra realized she felt at ease beside him. A man who should have been her enemy, yet had shown her nothing but respect. "Will you tell me about your people?" she asked at last. "Not as my father's ledgers describe them, but as they truly are." Surprise flickered across Rask's face, followed by cautious approval. He began to speak, his deep voice painting images of Apache life. Their bond with the land, their ceremonies, their losses as white settlements spread. He spoke of earning leadership not only through battle, but through wisdom within the stone-bind circle. "My people are proud," he said as the first stars emerged. "Too proud, perhaps, to see that the old ways cannot remain unchanged. Yet the ways offered by the white man destroy what makes us Apache." "There must be a path between," Zephyra said softly. Rask's expression darkened. "Those who seek it are called traitors by both sides." The words lingered in the night air, heavy with lived truth. Zephyra sensed that Rask himself stood at a perilous crossing, caught between the weight of tradition and the necessity of change. His question came without warning, sharp in its honesty. "What truth do your people hide behind church steeples and cavalry forts?" The directness startled her, yet she answered without retreat. She spoke of the East's contradictions, of sermons that preached charity while ambition crushed the weak beneath it. She told him of Halvar Kine's disillusionment after her mother's death, and how grief had driven him west in search of simpler rules, even if they were harsher. "He taught me to judge people as they are," she said, "not by race or station. It set me apart from other settler women." "Different," Rask echoed, "yet still of your people. As I am of mine." As the night deepened, the desert shed its warmth with sudden cruelty. The temperature fell sharply, and Zephyra shivered despite herself. Without comment, Rask rose, retrieved a blanket from his few possessions, and settled it around her shoulders. The gesture was simple, unspoken, and deeply moving. It was care without expectation, respect made tangible. "Thank you," she said, meaning far more than the cloth. Rask inclined his head, understanding reflected in his eyes. He sat nearby, close enough for conversation, distant enough to honor space. "Tomorrow," he said, "we move again. This place shelters us, but not for long." "Where will we go?" He considered before answering. "There is a place in the mountains where my people gather when danger presses too close. Few outsiders know of it." "And you would take me there?" Zephyra asked, surprised. "Would your people accept me?" A complex shadow crossed his face. "Some will not. But I remain chief. My word still carries weight." He studied her in the firelight. "And you have earned trust." "Because I did not call out to the patrol?" she asked. "Because you saw me as a man," he replied, "not only as an enemy." The words carried more meaning than either needed to voice. In the span of days, boundaries once thought unbreakable had shifted. Fear had given way to guarded respect, enemies to something neither yet dared to name. Wrapped in the borrowed blanket, beneath a sky dense with stars, Zephyra drifted toward sleep, her thoughts restless. What awaited her among Rask's people? Could she truly live among the Redvale kin, even for a time? And what of her father? Would she ever see Halvar Kane again? Beneath those questions lay something deeper, more unsettling in its intensity. The bond she felt with Rask defied logic and upbringing alike. It was not romance, not as she understood it from books or memory. It was quieter, heavier, a recognition between kindred spirits shaped by loss and endurance. Across the fading fire, Rask watched her features soften in sleep. She continued to unsettle him. Where he had expected fear, she showed resolve. Where prejudice might have lived, she offered understanding. She had endured the desert with rare resilience, and met his gaze without flinching. In all his years of war, Rask had never known another like Zephyra Kane. The Great Spirit had placed her in his path with purpose. Of that he was certain. What that purpose might be remained an unanswered riddle. One truth stood clear. Protecting her would demand more than strength of arms. It would require confronting the traditions of his people and the unexpected stirrings within his own heart. With that burden upon him, Rask settled into the light sleep of a warrior, alert to danger, yet resting enough to endure. Dawn broke over the canyon in bands of gold. Zephyra awoke to find Rask already moving, scanning the surroundings with practiced vigilance. "We leave within the hour," he said. "Eat." He offered a mix of dried berries and nuts, simple, nourishing trail food. As preparations were made, Zephyra felt an unexpected reluctance to leave the canyon. It had been a place of refuge, of conversation that had begun to bridge the divide between their worlds. Ahead lay uncertainty, the judgment of Rask's people, the hazards of travel, the growing complexity of her own emotions. "Are you ready?" Rask asked, his perceptive eyes reading more than she wished to reveal. Zephyra squared her shoulders, drawing on the strength forged by desert trials. Yes, as they passed through the narrow canyon mouth and stepped back into the open land beyond, both sensed they were crossing more than stone and shadow. They were entering a future neither could foresee, bound by circumstance and connection in defiance of a bitter history. The desert stretched before them, harsh, luminous, unyielding. Somewhere beyond its shimmering horizon lay answers not yet formed, about themselves, about each other, and about whether common ground could exist in a land fractured by fear. The journey to Ravenspine Hollow took 3 careful days. Rask guided them along hidden paths through rugged terrain, avoiding routes where the ash-spore column or splitmark folk might pass. For Zephyra, it became a journey of discovery, not only of the land's stark beauty, but of the man who led her through it. Rask's understanding of the land ran deeper than simple familiarity. He did not merely walk the desert. He read it. Where Zephyra saw cracked earth and hostile stone, he found hidden water, recognized edible growth, and interpreted the faint signs left behind by animals. What surprised her most was his willingness to explain these things, pointing out plants, tracks, and markings as they traveled. "Your people treat the desert as an enemy," Rask said, as they rested beneath a jagged rock outcrop during the blistering heat of the second day. "They try to conquer it. And the Redvale kin?" Zephyra asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "We see it as a stern teacher," he replied. "It rewards respect and punishes arrogance." "And what am I to the desert?" she asked, managing a faint smile. The corner of Rask's mouth lifted. A fast learner. By the 3rd day, the terrain began to rise. The air cooled, vegetation thickened, and stone replaced sand beneath their boots. Zephyra sensed they were close. Rask grew increasingly alert, pausing often to listen or study the path ahead. "Does the ash spur column patrol these mountains?" she asked after one such stop. Rask nodded. "Yes, and my people have watched these slopes for generations." He fixed his gaze forward. "We are nearing a place few outsiders have seen, and none have left to speak of." The weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. "Will your warriors see me as a threat?" she asked quietly. "You remain under my protection," Rask answered. Then he hesitated. "But it would be unwise for you to wander alone. Some wounds between our peoples are too deep to be mended by reason alone." As the afternoon shadows stretched long across the mountainside, they crested a ridge. Zephyra halted, breath catching at the sight below. Nestled within a guarded valley lay Ravenspine Hollow. Dozens of dome-shaped shelters, woven brush and hide, stood arranged in deliberate circles. Thin strands of smoke rose from cooking fires, drifting against sheer cliffs that protected the settlement on 3 sides. A narrow stream cut through the valley floor, glinting in the light. "It's beautiful," Zephyra whispered. This was nothing like the crude encampments painted by frontier rumors. It was a living community, ordered, deliberate, and clearly shaped by generations of survival. "It is the last true home of my people," Rask said, a trace of sorrow in his voice. "Each season, more are forced toward reservation lands. Soon, even this may be taken." They stood in silence before he gestured for her to follow. Their arrival did not go unnoticed. Children were first to see them, shouting and running toward the heart of the camp. Women paused mid-task. Men reached instinctively for weapons. Within moments, a gathering formed, drawn by the unprecedented sight of their war leader returning with a white woman walking freely at his side. Rask lifted his hand and spoke swiftly in his tongue. Zephyra did not understand the words, but the authority in his voice was unmistakable, part explanation, part command. Some faces hardened with distrust. Others showed open curiosity. The elders watched in measured silence. A tall warrior stepped forward, his presence nearly rivaling Rask's own. This was Korak, his second in command. The two men spoke in low, urgent tones, casting brief glances toward Zephyra. She held her ground, refusing to shrink beneath the weight of hostile stares. Her father, Halvar Kyne, had taught her that dignity commanded respect more surely than submission. She sensed the Red Veil kin understood strength when they saw it. At last, Rask turned to her. "You will stay with Saren," he said. "She is our healer. She speaks some English and will guide you." An elderly woman approached, her posture straight despite her years. Deep lines marked her face, but her eyes were sharp, measuring. Saren studied Zephyra carefully. "This one survived the open desert," she said in rough but steady English. "That is no small thing for any woman." "She is under my protection," Rask stated firmly. Saren nodded once. "Then come. You need food and rest before the Stonebind Circle convenes." As Zephyra followed her toward one of the larger shelters, she felt dozens of eyes tracking her steps. She was a curiosity, perhaps a danger. Only Rask's authority shielded her, a truth that both steadied and unsettled her. Inside Saren's dwelling, the air was cool, heavy with the scent of drying herbs tied along the curved supports. She gestured for Zephyra to sit, then prepared a simple meal of corn cakes and dried meat steeped in broth. Without turning, Saren spoke. "Rask says your eyes met across fire." Zephyra hesitated. "Something happened," she said carefully. "Something I don't fully understand." The old woman faced her, gaze piercing. "The old stories speak of spirits who recognize one another across many lifetimes." She set the bowl before Zephyra. "It is rare, and between Apache and White, it has not been known." "I didn't choose this," Zephyra said, a quiet urgency in her voice. "Nor did he," Saren replied gently. "The Great Spirit chooses paths beyond our knowing. We can only walk the road that opens before us." Their exchange ended abruptly when angry voices rose outside the shelter, sharp and heated, carrying clearly through the woven walls. Saren's expression tightened with concern. "The Stonebind Circle gathers sooner than expected," she said quietly. "Many are angered by your presence." Zephyra Kane set aside the food she had barely touched. "Should I face them? Speak for myself?" "No." Saren's answer was immediate, leaving no room for debate. "This matter belongs to Rask. A woman, especially a white woman, would not be welcomed there." Forced into stillness, Zephyra could only wait, her thoughts spiraling as decisions were made beyond her reach. Through the entrance of the dwelling, she glimpsed warriors converging at the heart of Ravenspine Hollow, their stances rigid, voices rising with agitation. "What are they saying?" Zephyra asked. Saren listened, her brow furrowing. "Some demand you be sent away. Others argue you should be kept as a captive, traded for Red Veil kin taken by the Ash Spur column." She hesitated, then continued. "And a few claim your presence is a sign of misfortune that can only be ended by your death." Cold spread through Zephyra's veins, yet she forced herself to remain composed. "And Rask?" "He speaks of visions," Saren replied softly, "of signs that demand listening when the Great Spirit speaks in unfamiliar ways." She shook her head. "It is not easy. He asks much of men who have lost wives and children to settlers and soldiers." As the argument outside intensified, Zephyra felt torn, fear for her own life battling concern for Rask. He was gambling his authority, perhaps even his standing as chief, for her sake. A woman he had known only days, a woman from a people who had inflicted immeasurable pain on his own. "I never should have come here," she whispered. "I've only brought him trouble." Saren placed a weathered hand on her arm, the gesture unexpectedly gentle. "Trouble follows all who step onto new paths. What matters is whether the path leads somewhere worth the cost." Suddenly, silence fell across the camp. Through the doorway, Zephyra saw Rask standing at the center of the gathering, his posture unyielding. He spoke a few sharp words, final, unquestionable, then turned and walked straight toward Saren's dwelling. He ducked inside, his face controlled, tension evident in his shoulders. "The stone-bind circle is divided," he said without preamble. "You may remain, for now, but under conditions. You will not leave this area without escort, and you will make yourself useful to the camp." Relief washed through Zephyra. "Thank you. I'll do whatever is asked." It was not easily won, Rask said quietly, lowering his voice so only she and Saren could hear. "Korak and the younger warriors wanted you gone, or worse. Only the elders who still honor visions tipped the balance." "What happens now?" Zephyra asked. "Now," Saren interjected, "you learn our ways. Show respect to the Red Veil kin. Give them reason to see you as more than an enemy." Rask nodded. "I leave at dawn to scout ash spur column movements. They have drawn closer in recent weeks. I will return in 3 days." His eyes held Zephyra's. "Can you endure among my people until then?" The question carried more than one meaning: survival, temptation to flee, endurance under hostility. "Yes," she answered simply. Something like approval flickered in Rask's gaze. With a brief nod to Saren, he turned and left, leaving Zephyra to face what lay ahead. The days that followed tested her in ways she had never imagined. True to her word, Zephyra immersed herself in camp life wherever help was tolerated. Many women initially rejected her, turning away when she approached. She persisted regardless, beginning with the hardest, least desirable work: gathering firewood, hauling water from the stream, scraping hides for tanning. Saren became an unexpected ally, guiding her through customs and translating when needed. The old healer seemed to regard Zephyra as a kind of living lesson, perhaps a bridge to understanding the Splitmark folk who pressed ever closer to Apache lands. "Your hands were soft when you arrived," Saren observed on the second day, examining Zephyra's blistered palms after hours of grinding corn. "Now they begin to learn true work." "I worked at Blackreach Stand," Zephyra protested gently. Saren waved the remark aside. "Store work, not life work." Her tone held no cruelty, only the plain truth of someone forged by survival. Gradually, resistance softened. It began with the children, unburdened by history. They watched Zephyra from a distance, laughing when she noticed them, until curiosity overcame caution. Soon they crept closer, bold fingers reaching out to touch her sun-bright hair with wide-eyed wonder. And little by little, Ravenspine Hollow began to see her not as an omen, but as a presence that endured. The women who had watched her in silence began to notice her steady effort. Small signs of acceptance followed, an unspoken correction that made a task easier, a ladle of stew shared at dusk, a brief nod when paths crossed. Not everyone softened. Korak and those aligned with him kept their distance, their looks open and wary. Zephyra Kane felt that scrutiny wherever she went, as if they waited for a single misstep to confirm their doubts. Late on the third afternoon, as Zephyra helped Osha string strips of meat for drying, movement along the edge of Ravenspine Hollow caught her eye. Warriors gathered with weapons in hand, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the ridgeline. "What's happening?" Zephyra asked. Osha's English, improved by long hours working together, carried urgency now. Scouts see dust, she said. Many horses. Maybe soldiers. Zephyrah's pulse jumped. The ash spur column. This close. Either the sanctuary had been found, or the danger was breathing down its neck. The meaning struck hard. Discovery would bring blood. Women and children would suffer with the Red Veil kin. Rask, due back today, might ride straight into a trap. A choice formed quickly. She could stay silent and protect her fragile place here, or she could offer what she knew, drawn from years watching soldiers move through the land around Blackreach Stand, to people who still questioned her presence. The decision surprised her with its clarity. Zephyrah walked toward the armed gathering, ignoring Osha's warning hand at her sleeve. Korak stood at the center, issuing clipped orders. He halted when Zephyrah approached, suspicion sharpening his features. "I can help," she said plainly, meeting his stare. "I know how cavalry searches these mountains." "So you can signal them?" a younger warrior snapped. "Lead them here?" Zephyrah shook her head. "If I meant to betray you, I would have done it days ago when the patrol passed." She faced Korak again, recognizing his authority in Rask's absence. "Your people have shown me doubt and mercy. There are children here, women who deserve no soldier's judgment." Korak studied her in silence, weighing more than her words. At last he motioned her forward. "Speak." For the next hour, Zephyrah laid out everything she knew: search patterns, how cavalry horses faltered on steep ground, the routes soldiers favored when they suspected a hidden camp. Doubt gave way to reluctant respect, as her knowledge proved useful. Together they shaped a plan. False trails leading away, signs of an abandoned camp, terrain used to hide what mattered most. As warriors moved to carry it out, Korak paused beside her. "You aid us against your own," he said, not accusing, observing. "I help those who sheltered me," Zephyrah answered, "people who only wish to live their way." Something shifted in Korak's gaze. He nodded once and turned to his men. Back in the camp, women prepared for the worst, bundling supplies, calming frightened children. Zephyrah joined without being asked, hands moving in rhythm with theirs. She no longer felt like a guest, but part of the effort to endure. Near dusk, a lone figure appeared on the ridge. Rask returned as promised. He took in the scene at once, spoke briefly with scouts, then went straight to Korak. From where she helped Osha secure medicinal herbs, Zephyrah watched them confer, Korak gesturing toward her. Rask's face stayed composed, but his stance hinted at surprise and approval. Later, when the camp settled into uneasy watchfulness, Rask found Zephyrah seated near Saren's dwelling, fatigue finally catching her. "Korak says you helped plan our defense," he said, sitting beside her. Zephyrah nodded, uncertain. "It felt necessary." "It was," Rask replied, "and unexpected. My second does not impress easily, especially by those he names enemies." "And what am I now?" she asked. Rask's mouth curved faintly. "A question. To him, and sometimes to me." At dawn, the next day, the cavalry passed within a mile, following the false trail Zephyrah had predicted they would trust. By midday they were gone, dust drifting long after as they rode back toward their fort, never knowing how close they had come. The moment changed everything. Zephyrah was no longer merely tolerated as Rask's protected charge. She had chosen the safety of Ravenspine Hollow over her own escape. Even Korak, still reserved, offered a respectful nod when their paths crossed. Acknowledgement earned in a moment that mattered. Their paths crossed often now. The women drew her more easily into their work and quiet exchanges, asking, through gestures or halting English, about life among the Splitmark folk and the distant towns beyond the desert. The most meaningful change, however, unfolded between Zephyrah Kane and Rask. The careful distance he had once kept, out of respect, or perhaps uncertainty, softened with time. Their conversations grew longer, more open, shaped by shared days and unguarded thoughts. One evening, as they walked beside the narrow stream winding through Ravenspine Hollow, Rask finally voiced the question Zephyra had sensed since the day she chose to help against the Ash Spur column. "Do you regret not returning to your people when you could?" he asked. Zephyra did not answer quickly. "I miss my father," she said at last. "I fear his grief, believing me lost." She paused, searching for words equal to the truth forming inside her. "But I have seen things here I never expected. Strength, dignity, families holding together despite everything done to them." She met Rask's gaze. "The stories my people tell about the Red Veil kin are wrong, or unfinished." "As are the stories my people tell of whites," Rask replied quietly. "Truth rarely lives in the tales enemies tell of one another." They walked in silence while the sun lowered, shadows stretching across the valley. Then Zephyra spoke again. "What happens now?" Rask stopped and turned fully toward her. "Now we name what has taken root between us," he said, his voice deeper, stripped of distance. "The thing that began when our eyes met across the flames of Blackreach Stand." Her pulse quickened. She had tried to dismiss it as circumstance, as survival, yet each day had strengthened what she felt. Curiosity growing into respect, respect into something undeniable. "The Great Spirit sometimes sets souls on paths never meant to cross," Rask continued, lifting a hand to her cheek, his touch gentle. "I have fought whites for 15 summers. I have buried kin, lost pieces of myself to war. But when I saw you standing in fire, something in me remembered peace." The warmth of his hand sent a tremor through her, recognition, not fear. "I don't know what this means," Zephyra whispered. "How it could ever work." "Nor do I," Rask admitted. But to deny it would be to silence the Great Spirit." As the last light gilded the land, Zephyra stepped closer and placed her palm over his heart. "Then we listen," she said, "and find the path together." Their kiss was careful, uncertain, a first step into ground both believed forbidden. Yet in that moment the world shifted, not only between a man and a woman, but between the histories they carried. It was a fragile beginning, burdened with obstacles neither could yet name. Still, Zephyra knew with sudden clarity that whatever lay ahead, they would face it not as enemies, nor merely as allies, but as two souls who had recognized each other across the deepest divide. From that recognition, a future neither had imagined began to take shape. The weeks that followed transformed Zephyra's life. What had started as captivity became belonging. What began as an unspoken connection with Rask deepened into a bond they still struggled to define. The camp that once felt alien now moved with familiar rhythm. Zephyra learned the cadence of daily labor. Food prepared, hides cured, tools fashioned. She watched the Red Veil kin hunt, scout, and guard their sanctuary. The children learned skills and stories together, and somehow she found her place among them. Her knowledge of healing plants, learned from her mother's books and refined through years at Sunvale Exchange, made her valuable to Saren. The medicine woman began treating Zephyra as both apprentice and kin, teaching her Apache remedies with quiet patience. "Your hands are right for this," Saren said one afternoon, while they prepared a poultice for a fevered child. They listened to the plants. Yet acceptance was not universal. Though most of the camp now tolerated, or even valued, Zephyra, a hostile faction remained, led by Dreven. His family had died in a cavalry raid, and to him, any white soul was beyond forgiveness. "He watches you with snake eyes," Osha warned one day. "Be careful when Rask is gone." The warning was needless. Zephyra had felt Draven's hatred since her arrival. Still, she met his glares with calm dignity, a composure that seemed only to sharpen his anger. Rask knew the danger well. Though his authority as chief still held, he understood that old wounds festered easily, and that the path Zephyra now walked beside him was as perilous as it was extraordinary. Though his authority within Ravenspine Hollow felt steadier after the patrol's misdirection, Rask understood that his bond with Zephyra Kane complicated his rule. Trust among the Redvale kin had grown, yet suspicion lingered, especially where power and tradition were concerned. He began taking Zephyra on brief scouting walks beyond the camp. Part of it was practical, keeping her away from Draven's hostile gaze. Part of it was something deeper, a wish to show her the land as he knew it. During one such outing, they rested atop a mesa overlooking a sweep of desert and stone, and Rask spoke of tomorrow for the first time. "The reservation waits for us whether we choose it or not," he said, eyes fixed on the far horizon. "Each season more of my people surrender, believing there is no other way." "Would you ever accept it?" Zephyra asked carefully, knowing how fiercely he rejected the idea. Rask's jaw tightened. To live as prisoners, to depend on the ash spur column for food that often never comes, to see our children beaten for speaking their own words. He shook his head. "I would rather die fighting." "There must be another path," Zephyra said softly, laying her hand on his arm. "Something between surrender and destruction." Rask covered her hand with his own. "Perhaps," he said. "But who would help us find it? The army demands obedience. The Splitmark folk want our land." Zephyra fell silent, then spoke with growing resolve. "My father," she said. "Halvar Kane has standing with settlers and territorial officials. If he knew I was alive, if he understood what I've seen here—" Hope, doubt, and something like fear crossed Rask's face. "You wish to return to him," he said evenly. "Not alone," Zephyra replied. "Together. To build a bridge no one believes can exist." The weight of the idea hung between them, a trader's daughter and an Apache war chief standing side by side before officials who recognized neither mercy nor nuance. "They would kill me," Rask said at last, "or imprison me and hang me later." "Not if we're careful," Zephyra insisted. "Blackreach Stand was neutral ground. Anyone could come in peace. What if such a place existed again?" "A sanctuary," Rask murmured, a trace of bitter irony in his voice. "Like the one my people barely keep alive here." "One recognized by both sides," Zephyra pressed. "A place for trade, for talk, for the path you just spoke of." Rask searched her face. "You truly believe this can be done?" "I believe we must try," she answered. "For your people, for us." Before he could respond, a distant bird call echoed, an alert from a sentry below. Rask's posture sharpened instantly. "Riders," he said, moving to the mesa's edge. After a long look, disbelief crossed his features. "3. One appears to be your father." Zephyra's breath caught. "My father? Here?" "Either he tracks better than I believed," Rask said grimly, "or someone helped him find us." Draven's face flashed in Zephyra's mind. Had this been his way of forcing her removal, or setting a trap for Rask? "We must go down," she said urgently. "If it's my father, he could be in danger." Rask nodded. "Stay close to me. This reunion may not be as you hope." They descended quickly along a hidden path. Rask signaled the concealed Redvale kin to hold their ground. Around a bend, the riders came into view. Halvar Kane rode in front, his face etched with exhaustion and disbelief. Behind him was Irek Voss, a trader Zephyra recognized from Sunvale Exchange. The third man wore the uniform of the Ash Spur column, a sergeant. Zephyra stepped forward instinctively, but Rask's hand stopped her. "Wait," he murmured. "Let them show their intent." Halvor spotted them and reined in sharply. "Zephyra," he called, his voice breaking. "Is it truly you?" "Yes, father," she answered. "I'm alive. I'm safe." Halvor moved to dismount, but the sergeant restrained him, eyes locked on Rask. "That's Rask," the soldier said tensely. "The most wanted Apache in the territory." "He saved my life," Zephyra said, stepping closer to Rask. "Without him I would have died in the desert." Confusion crossed Halvor's face as he took in their closeness, Rask's protective stance beside her. "What is this?" he asked. "Are you his prisoner?" "No, father," Zephyra replied firmly, just as the moment teetered on the edge of understanding or catastrophe. Zephyra answered, knowing the moment she had dreaded and prepared for had arrived sooner than expected. "I'm here by choice." The silence that followed carried weight enough to bend the air. Halvor Kane was no simple man. Years on the frontier had sharpened his judgment. He saw the change in his daughter immediately, not just in her words, but in the way she stood beside Rask, neither afraid nor constrained. "I think we should talk," Halvor said at last, his tone steady but guarded. "All of us." The protest came instantly. Joran Pikefall stiffened in his saddle. "Kane, I rode out to help recover your daughter, not to negotiate with the man responsible for raids on settlements and stage lines." "And I appreciate that," Halvor replied evenly. "But my daughter stands before me alive, and she says this man saved her life. That alone earns him the right to speak." An hour later, an assembly unlike any the territory had known took shape beneath a stand of trees near the mesa's base. Halvor Kane, Joran Pikefall, and Irek Voss sat opposite Rask and Zephyra, a small fire between them. Generations of fear and bloodshed hovered in the quiet, like unseen witnesses. Zephyra broke the silence. She told them everything. Blackreach stand in flames, her flight into the desert, Rask finding her at the edge of death, the journey to Ravenspine Hollow, and the truth she had learned about the Red Veil kin. "The stories we tell about each other aren't the whole truth, father," she said. "I've seen it myself. The Apache fight because they see no other way. Their children starve on reservations. Their lands vanish season by season." "And what of our people?" Irek Voss snapped. "Families killed, wagons burned. Was that necessity too?" "Some raids are carried out by young warriors I cannot fully restrain," Rask said calmly, speaking for the first time. "Others by those who have lost everything and see revenge as the only future left to them." His gaze shifted, steady and unflinching, to Joran Pikefall. "And some attacks blamed on Apache were not ours at all." The sergeant shifted. "That's a serious claim." "My scouts have found proof," Rask replied. "Ash Spur column buttons beside the dead, army horseshoes in the tracks." Halvor frowned. "Why would soldiers do such a thing?" "To keep the territory under military control," Rask said. "Peace brings settlers. Settlers bring civilian rule. The army loses its grip." "That's a lie," Pikefall snapped. "Is it?" Zephyra asked quietly. "Father, remember the Wagner homestead? Mr. Wagner said the raiders spoke English when they thought no one could hear." Halvor's face darkened. "I reported that to the fort. Nothing was done." The truth settled heavily among them. The war that had consumed the land was deeper and more manipulated than any of them had wanted to believe. "What do you propose?" Halvor asked at last. Zephyra met Rask's eyes, drawing strength from his stillness. "A beginning. Rebuild Blackreach stand, not as it was, but as neutral ground. A place for trade, for talks, for solving disputes without blood." "Impossible," Irek Voss scoffed. "No settler would trust Apache promises." And no Apache would trust settlers or soldiers, Rask replied evenly. Yet here we are, speaking instead of killing. Because of one woman, Rask added, nodding toward Zephyra. One who chose to look beyond fear. Zephyra stood between them, aware of the history pressing in from both sides. It won't be easy, but what we're doing now only guarantees more graves. My father's post was once respected by all who came in peace. It can be again. Halvor studied her, seeing not the girl he had raised, but a woman forged by fire and choice. Then he turned to Rask, weighing him with the practiced judgment of a frontier man. My daughter trusts you, Halvor said. That counts for something in my ledger. And her courage weighs heavily in mine, Rask answered. Something fragile but real took shape. Not friendship, not peace, but the first trace of respect. Joran Pikefall remained wary, shaken by what he had heard. Irek Voss still carried anger in his eyes, yet even he seemed unsettled by the sight before him. A white woman standing as an equal beside an Apache war chief, speaking of a path no one else had dared imagine. As the council stretched into the afternoon, what had once seemed unthinkable began to form. Blackreach Stand would rise again, its neutrality sworn by Halvor Kane's name and Rask's word. Rask would share intelligence on renegade bands outside Redvale authority. It was not peace, but it was the first step away from endless war. Halvor would use his standing with territorial officials to make certain that the food and supplies promised to Reservation Apache actually arrived. When the discussion slowed, he finally voiced the question that had hovered unspoken from the beginning. And what about you two? He asked. Where do you see yourselves in all this? Zephyra felt Rask's hand close around hers, a quiet declaration no one present failed to notice. We stand between worlds, she said calmly. Maybe that's exactly where we belong. The meaning settled heavily. Zephyra Kane, daughter of a respected frontier trader, had chosen Rask, war chief of the Red Veil kin. Halvor Kane's weathered face reflected the struggle that truth stirred in him. Yet as he studied his daughter, her steady posture, the resolve in her eyes, something in him shifted, slowly, toward acceptance. The world won't make this easy, he said at last. For either of you. When has the world ever made anything easy for frontier women? Zephyra replied with a faint, familiar smile. Or for chiefs who choose peace over war? As the sun dipped toward the western ridges, stretching long shadows across the land, the unlikely gathering drew to a close. No papers were signed, no seals stamped, yet something unprecedented had occurred. A first, fragile step across a divide carved by decades of blood. When the three visitors prepared to leave, Halvor pulled his daughter into a fierce embrace. Come home when you're ready, he whispered. Both of you. We'll build something new from what was burned. Tears pricked Zephyra's eyes. It was a blessing, measured, cautious, but real. As the riders disappeared into the deepening dusk, Rask's arm slid around her waist, drawing her close. Your father is a rare man, he said quietly. Now I see where your courage comes from. He surprised me too, Zephyra admitted, resting against him. I never thought he'd see past what he was taught. Few can, Rask replied. It is a gift. They stood in silence as evening settled around them. The future they imagined still felt fragile, perhaps even impossible in a land shaped by mistrust. Yet after what they had just witnessed, hope no longer felt foolish. What happens now? Zephyra asked softly. For us? Rask turned to her, solemn yet gentle in the fading light. That depends on what you want, Zephyra Kane. I want what shouldn't be possible, she answered. A life where I don't have to choose between worlds. He lifted his hand, cupping her cheek with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the strength for which he was known. "Then we build that world," he said, "stone by stone." Their kiss was quiet, deliberate, a promise rather than a declaration. Not just of love, but of resolve. They knew the road ahead would be brutal. Resistance from both sides, the weight of history, the cost of defying expectations. But beneath the vast desert sky, they were certain their meeting had never been chance. It was a beginning, one that might change more than their own lives. 5 years later, the trading post at Ember Turn stood as proof that the impossible could endure. Rebuilt from the ruins of Blackreach Stand, it had become more than a place of trade. It was a symbol of cautious peace in a territory once ruled by fear. A sign above the door read, "Sunvale Exchange," though those who knew the truth understood the meaning behind the name. The union between Zephyra and Rask, sealed in Redvale ceremony and later recognized by a progressive territorial judge, had scandalized some and inspired many. That summer morning, a small boy of 4 winters ran laughing across the packed earth of the yard, his copper skin warm in the sun, his features a perfect blend of both parents. Var, named for blood and legacy, chased a wooden hoop, his laughter echoing through the desert air. From the porch, Zephyra watched while cradling their second child, a 6-month-old daughter with serious dark eyes, already marked by quiet intensity. They had named her Elin, in honor of the old medicine woman Saren, who had guided Zephyra and passed to the spirit world the winter before. Nearby, Halvar Kane, gray now but still strong, sat carving a small wooden horse for his grandson. To many people's surprise, he had become one of the fiercest advocates for the fragile coexistence his daughter and son-in-law embodied. His influence among the Splitmark folk and his ties to territorial officials had helped turn vision into reality. Under the open sky, between worlds once divided by blood, a different future was taking root. Slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably alive. "Papa's coming!" Var shouted, dropping his wooden hoop and sprinting toward the riders cutting across the yard. Rask swung down from his horse in one smooth motion and lifted his son into his arms. Time had etched a few lines into his face, but none of it dulled his presence. The true change lived in his eyes. Where the hard edge of a war leader once ruled, there now rested the steadier gaze of a man who had learned the weight of peace. Behind him rode 3 members of the Red Veil kin and 2 men of the Splitmark folk, representatives of the council that now met regularly to settle disputes and preserve the fragile balance of the region. Among them was Korak, once Rask's most doubtful lieutenant, now a respected voice for cooperation without surrendering Redvale tradition. "The treaty will hold," Rask said, as he climbed the steps and wrapped Zephyra Kine and the baby into a careful embrace. The new governor signed the accords. The road from that first tentative understanding to this broader peace had been long. There had been setbacks, renegade attacks, violations on both sides, political resistance from those who profited from unrest, but inch by inch, trust had taken root. Not long after, Joran Pikefall arrived, now a colonel and regional commander of the Ashspur column. Years earlier, doubt had defined him. Now it had hardened into guarded support, especially after his own inquiry confirmed Rask's claims about soldiers staging false raids in Redvale colors. The exposure led to courts-martial and a sweeping reshaping of military command. "Washington finally ratified the boundaries," Pikefall announced. "Redvale territory is recognized under federal law." Halvar Kane gave a low grunt of approval. "Only took them 5 years to see reason." Not all resistance had vanished. Draven, the warrior who had most fiercely opposed Zephyra's presence at Ravenspine Hollow, had broken away with a small band, rejecting any future that included peace. On the settler side, Men like Irek Voss still insisted that submission, or erasure, was the only answer. But those voices, once loud, had grown fewer as cooperation proved its worth. Trade flowed again. Sunvale Exchange served anyone who came in peace. Redvale, settlers, soldiers alike. Behind it stood a home shaped by two worlds, where Zephyra and Rask lived in a bond that defied custom and deepened with time. As evening settled and the council departed, Rask took Var's hand. "Come, today I teach you tracking." The boy's face lit up. At 4 winters, he moved easily between languages and customs, never knowing them as separate. Later, as the desert cooled, Zephyra saw them returning. Rask wearing the quiet pride of a father passing on knowledge, Var clutching a clay cast of a rabbit track, his first true prize. That night, after the children slept, Zephyra and Rask walked beneath a sky scattered with stars. It had become their ritual. "Do you ever wonder," Zephyra asked softly, "what would have happened if you hadn't found me in that cave?" Rask considered it carefully. "I would have kept fighting until I died, by blade, age, or behind reservation walls, and many would have fallen with me." She squeezed his hand. "And I would have lived only half a life." They stopped at the edge of their land, gazing over the moonlit desert, the same harsh place that nearly took her life, and now sustained their shared hope. "I remember being afraid," she murmured, "not just of you, but of everything this frontier meant. Loss, violence, hardship. And now?" Rask asked, drawing her close. She looked up at him. The proud lines their son had inherited, the eyes that once met hers across a burning stand and altered both their paths. "Now I know the real frontier was never the land. It was the space between hearts that seemed too different to meet. And we crossed it." Rask kissed her, the spark unchanged by years. "We cross it still," he said. Every day, they returned to a home where their children slept beneath the shared shelter of 2 cultures, learning to live side by side. Zephyra thought of the words spoken long ago in a hidden canyon. "I finally found you," and understood how deeply they rang true. Peace remained fragile, the work unfinished. But each dawn brought new allies, new understanding. The children playing behind the exchange, Redvale and Splitmark together, were growing up with stories of possibility instead of hate. Under the vast desert sky, Blackreach Stand shone as proof that courage could overcome fear and understanding could outlast prejudice. The future was unwritten, but Zephyra Kane and Rask would meet it as they always had. Together, bridging worlds one step at a time. An echo of hope, love, and human connection lingers here. This channel exists for that very purpose, to be a quiet refuge after long hours and heavy days, a place where stories soften the edges, offer comfort, and remind you that your heart matters, that you matter. Our team is devoted to sharing stories that speak to the soul and cast a gentle light into the still moments of your evening. As you settle in for the night, know it is truly an honor to be part of your nightly ritual. We hope this tale has left your heart a little lighter, your thoughts a little steadier, and your spirit renewed for the road ahead. Until we meet again in another story, may your sleep be deep and restoring, filled with peaceful dreams. May you wake refreshed, carrying a small piece of Zephyra Kane and Rask's enduring spirit with you into a new day. Thank you for spending this time with us. With sincere gratitude for welcoming us into your evening, finally let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West, stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.